Welcome to a new video on the Photography Minimalist. Now, if you've been watching my channel over the past few months, you probably got an idea what my channel is all about. And in a short summary, it's all about achieving more with less as a true photography minimalist. A large portion of my videos are about analog photography, film photography, because that's what I do most. And some videos are about digital cameras. And this video I'm going to be using a digital DSLR to talk about macro photography in relation to close-up photography. And for this video I'm going to be using, believe it or not, a 16-year-old Canon 350D. And if you remember, a few months ago I posted a video about a Canon 30, which is an eye-controlled focus camera, an analog camera, which I bought at a charity shop, including this 28 to 135 millimeter Canon zoom lens, which is image stabilize, ultrasonic zoom, and it has a macro capability. I bought that set for $12, and I thought it would be a good idea to use this lens on a Canon 350D body to do some close-up photography or macro photography of flowers. And we're going to find out if this is truly a macro lens. Now, to make some comparisons between macro photography and close-up photography, I also used an Asahi Pentax Bellows, on which I put a Takumar 50mm 2.0 lens. And this is connected through an M42 adapter to the Canon 350D. A body, by the way, which I received free of charge. So I'm going to be working with a set of maybe $12 to $20 to achieve the best possible images. Before we get into more details with regards to using the 350D, I think it might be a good idea to explain to you what actually is macro photography. When we talk about macro photography, we talk about the ability of your lens and your camera system to achieve a 1-to-1 ratio of your subject, a reproduction 1-to-1 of your subject. That means that you're able to reproduce the exact size of the subject you're photographing on your film plane or on your digital sensor. We can go even further and magnify even more, and then we get into extreme macro photography. But in the essence, macro photography is all about doing a 1-to-1 reproduction in size, real life size of your subject, and translating that in that same size to your sensor or to your film plane. That brings us to an important point, because the lens I'm going to be using, the 28 to 135 zoom lens, says it has a macro capability. But we're only able to get to a 1 to 5.3 ratio with this lens. That means that your subject that you're photographing at the closest possible distance is going to be 5.3 times smaller on your film plane or on your digital sensor. So in that sense, this is not a macro lens. It's being used on the lens probably to sell the lens better back in the day, because it's a lens back from 1998. So it's preferably called a close-up lens. This is not a macro lens. To get true macro photos, you either need a lens that will go to a 1-to-1 ratio, like I explained what macro photography is all about, or you could buy a cheap Bellows and attach them to any camera, digital or analog, fit on a very nice lens, good quality glass, and you'll easily achieve a 1-to-1 ratio or even more. Now, before I continue using the zoom lens, let me first show you the result I was able to achieve using the Bellows on the 350D. Well, as you can see, I photographed a cigarette, and This is more than a 1:1 ratio. I know that my sensor horizontal size is 22 millimeters, so I have a reference. After taking the photo, I measured the real size of the diameter of the cigarette, which is 8 millimeters, and I also measured the horizontal size approximately in the end result. Again, taking into account that the horizontal size of the sensor is 22 millimeters. And it brings me to a size of 1.4. And when I divide 1.4 by 0.8, so the size of the cigarette diameter in the end result versus the size of the cigarette in real life, I come to a ratio of 1.75 to 1. So in essence, the cigarette on the film plane, or in this sense, on the digital sensor, is almost 2 times as large as real life. So this is what we call extreme macro photography. Now, before I show you the images that I was able to achieve with the zoom lens, the 28 to 135, let me give you some hints and tips and my thoughts before I photographed these flowers. Number 1. Wind is your worst enemy when photographing macro photography in nature outside. Especially these flowers. In wind, it's impossible to photograph them, so you're going to need to choose another day. Point 2. Determining your depth of field. This is all related to your focal length and the aperture of your choice. I shot everything at the 135 millimeter of this zoom lens at an aperture of 5.6. It is the biggest aperture possible at the 135 millimeter, but for me that was the perfect depth of field. It wasn't too shallow. If you have a too shallow of a depth of field, it's almost impossible to pinpoint focus, and it's not always appropriate for your composition. So for me, 5.6 worked out absolutely fine, and all these photos were taken with 5.6. Now, I was lucky shooting in these lighting conditions at high shutter speed, so I could do everything handheld, and the image stabilization on the lens absolutely helped. If you don't have bright light conditions or an image stabilizer on your lens, you're going to need a tripod or a monopod. Don't forget that. Point number 4 is that you're going to be looking for compositions that are very simple and that have an uncluttered background. You want the focus, the emphasis on the subject that's in focus. So you don't want any distractions. So keep your composition as simple as possible and really watch the background and also the distance between the subject which is in focus and the background itself. Take those into account. The last point that I would like to mention is number 5, and that is switch off your autofocus and do everything with manual focus, because it's very difficult to exactly pinpoint the focus where you want in your composition with such a shallow depth of field doing it with the autofocus system. So I would advise you to put it to manual focus, and just by chance this lens from Canon has an ideal manual focus ring which works perfectly for these type of photographs. Now it's time to show you the results which I was able to achieve. I hope you enjoyed the results. Before you see the end results, I have a short video of the environment that I was in and also a collection of the different flowers that I have been photographing. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, you're more than welcome to do so to keep up with all my new videos. Take care, and I'll see you next time.